Hi, Margie Peterson, and I am here today at Stomp. Today's guest is dear friend Susie Rialp. She is an accomplished poet and a retired Montessori teacher. Hi, Susie.
Hello, Margie. So nice to see you. Nice to be with you and chat with you this morning.
You are one of my favorite people that is a virtual friend. Someday we might see each other in the flesh, but maybe
Friend
not.
is a true word.
That is a true word. But that is the wonderful thing about media. There's bad things about what we've been through, but the great thing is I got to meet my tribe virtually. I want you to share about how you came to North America. I know you're from the Philippines. I think it's in the Pacific, but I might be wrong. Just share about that incredible journey and how you became a Montessori teacher. Everybody, when they're young, doesn't really quite know what they're going to do. And you are a very brave soul.
Well, let me start with why I started teaching. When I was young, I was this very rebellious teenager, and I was cussing like Nixon's cousin as I drove through the wild highways of the Philippines. I missed my university, left just so I could have a fabulous education by the beach side. So you can see my priorities there. When I had to be pulled back into the right university, the University of the Philippines, they wouldn't accept me. So I didn't want to face my father because the roof would blow up if he'd find out that I was not accepted back to the University of the Philippines. So I turned to my godmother, who brought me to a Montessori school. And I got my Montessori training that way so that I could tell my father that I have a job. I don't need university anymore. When I went through Montessori, I realized that the educational system was horrible. And that's why I was so rebellious. I hated school. I was an underachiever. And when I read the books of Maria Montessori, I started to cry. I was just so amazed. And when I watched the children, I envied them for being raised that way. And being a Montessori teacher, I had to change myself. I had to get rid of all my beads and my torn jeans and my Carole King hairdo. And I had to transform into this prim and proper, calm, serene person to be the person I wanted my students to be. In other words, I had to be polite, which was new for me then. And so it had transformed me. And so I decided to further my education. So when I went back to my father and presented to him that, but Dad, I don't need university anymore. The roof still blew off and said, you need your education. You can't be an educator without education.
Kind of a good point, really. Dad does have a bit of a point.
Right. He does have a good point. So I had to pursue my studies. I worked hard to go back to University of the Philippines. And then I went to London, England to pursue more Montessori studies.
You know you went to London. You skipped that bit. Oh, goodness.
Yes, I went to London, England to get an international certificate. And that made me qualified to go to North America or to work anywhere around the world. No, I still didn't want to work around the world. I built a school in the Philippines. I stayed there until there was a revolution. President Marcos was being ousted during those days. These were in the late 1970s, 1980s, early 1980s. I had just gotten married, and the revolution, there was what you call people revolution, that all came out in the street and ousted President Marcos after 20 years of martial law. There was great unrest. You can imagine. The political scene was in shambles. I have a very political family, so we were in turmoil. And so my friend came and said, Susie, do you want to work in Canada? She was leaving the Philippines right before the revolution was about to start. And I said, yes, take me out of here.
So it was a good friend who said, let's go.
Yeah. And she said, I know a woman where I work, and she's very happy. She was very happy with her. And she said, I'd love to have another Filipino teacher like you. Of course, she didn't know what she got when she got me. But anyway, that's another story. She hired me. She looked at my credentials and she hired me and worked on my immigration papers here. So that's how I got here. So I had to go through this big transformation of myself first, and then a lot of training. I was also doing my master's in special education. I didn't exactly graduate, but I finished most of the courses because I had to flee at that point, or I would lose my job. And the revolution was, I didn't know what would happen in the Philippines. My in-laws were very closely tied to President Marcos. And then my family was very anti-Marcos. And I was in the middle of everything.
Oh, geez.
Fleeing the country would have been a good idea at that time.
So did you flee by yourself?
I sold all my wedding gifts, which was horrible.
Because you had to pay to get there.
I had to pay to get there. I asked my grandmother, who was still alive then, for some help. She helped me, and I just left. And I left with hardly any money. I mean, my grandma just helped me with the airfare, and I just fled with hardly any money. When I came to Canada, I only had about like $700 to survive for months. It was very difficult for me.
Oh,
it
my
was the most
goodness.
frightening thing I've ever done. I've never been to Canada then. I traveled around the world, but never to Canada. I only knew one person, and she had to be my friend forever. If not, I'd be in trouble.
Oh my
And,
gosh, you brave soul. But it was also because there weren't too many choices.
There weren't too many choices at that time. And I was very lucky to have gotten the job. Actually, when I came, they had already given the job to someone because I came too late.
Oh, no.
And so I had to find another job, and I applied all over the United States and Canada, and they wanted to hire me in San Francisco. And then I had another offer here on the mainland in White Rock Sea.
British Columbia.
And I chose Canada because there are health services, my friend, and the possibility of really coming back to the school that was first offered to me. And I did. And 6 months after, I got back to the school that had offered me the job in the first place.
That is
that brought
amazing. So at this point, you were married. You didn't have children yet, or you did have children at this point?
I didn't have children. So my husband and I were separated for 2.5 years because of immigration.
And so then you kept on working and you kept on working. And then he came over, I suppose, but things didn't work out. And we won't, because I don't understand any of that because I've been married for 40 years. I have no ability to talk about what all that is. Did you stay at the same Montessori school, or did you start your own?
After I moved to the original one that wanted me over here, I stayed there for 36 years until I retired in the great year of 2020.
Now, for people who don't know a lot about Montessori, this is my very minuscule knowledge. It was started by Maria Montessori. She was Italian. Read books about her. She's fascinating. But she realized that the kids needed something more than just rote learning. And so she created modules. And so she used, there's manipulatives. I mean, there's all sorts of little things to help you learn math and learn English so that you're not just memorizing, because not everybody can do that. Why did that approach of teaching appeal to you? Because for you, it transformed you. But what made you gravitate towards it? One, it was around in the Philippines, but there had to have been a reason you liked it better than the others.
Very good question. Well, you got that right. Maria Montessori created some didactic materials to help them learn through movement and experience. But what Maria Montessori did is she started out just observing children. She didn't have any theory. She was a doctor. She wasn't a teacher. She wanted to be a mathematician and an engineer before she became a doctor. So she had that brilliant mind in designing materials. But what made it different is she learned from the children. And from the children, she just supplied them with what they needed and what they wanted. And the educational system became that way. The children she first worked with were children who were from the poor communities, and they actually were children who they thought were insane. During that time, they were all lumped up with insane, never mind learning disabilities, never mind autism or mental issues. They were just all insane. They called them idiots at that time.
Oh my gosh.
And they were like rolling all over the floor because they had nothing, no materials, no furniture, nothing. So she created furniture for them. So she was the first one who created tiny furniture that are child size.
Child size, like Beatrix Potter for little hands.
Yeah. And then she thought that they weren't crazy. They were bored. Of course, they were playing with their thumbs. They didn't know what to play with, right? And they were watching little insects crawl on the floor or whatever. So she gave them things to play with. And then she gave them letters to feel. And then she told them the sounds of the letters, not the names of the letters. So when they put the sounds together, they started to read on their own, not from her. They put them together and the children themselves discovered how to read b, a, and t became bat. It was eureka from them. And she recorded them and then she encouraged them. So the children were who taught her how to teach children. And that was the most fascinating thing ever on earth. It had transformed me because I had a very unhappy elementary. I came from a private school of nuns. They weren't all mean. In fact, they were supposed to be better, as from the stories that I hear, better than other schools. These nuns were very strict and traditional. When I was younger, I was pretty happy. They were very nice to me, but I just had one very bad teacher. From then on, I rebelled and they scolded me for being underachiever. Instead of encourage me to achieve, they say, we got this test and why aren't you doing well in school? And they'd scold me instead of encourage me to learn. Things like those, they just didn't have the right methods at all.
And
I found Montessori very fascinating.
So once you're in the classroom, we won't talk about teachers, student teaching and all that, but your approach to students, what would you observe like Montessori, or you just develop the materials? And did you do lots of one-on-one? I had 1 year of Montessori. That was in my 3rd grade year, and I wished that I'd had it from the very beginning because I had the morning to myself and I did this stuff and it was just fun. And then I had group time. Now, I had one of those strict nuns that taught Montessori, but they believed in Montessori. And she told me I cheated once, and I will never forget it. It was so upsetting. I loved the group sessions because it was like having a magician come.
Exactly.
It was like, can't wait to guess right or guess wrong.
So that's exactly what she did. She created materials to invite you to work with it. So she made materials that are very attractive so that the teacher doesn't say, go play with this or go work with this material. She says, here are the materials, and they will go, oh, I want to play with that. I want to touch that. But you're not really just playing. You're learning as you play. Marie Montessori believes in play. As you were saying, yes, what has happened is in the classroom, the children is given a lot of freedom to choose what they want to learn. And so what you have to do is create an environment so that what they choose is the right one, right? So if you put very good mathematical toys in one corner, as opposed to putting dangerous tools, materials of,
the hammers, because they're wooden hammers. I remember that.
Yes. We had hammers and tools and anything practical because a child wanted to be like an adult. And so our purpose as teachers is to create independence, to encourage independence in the child's heart because they want to be like you. So you as a teacher has to be the model. You are part of the environment aside from all the materials. So you prepare the environment, put it in order because children love order. That's one thing she discovered. They don't like mess. They want order. And so your classroom had to be in order and you had to be in order. If you want to behave nicely, politely, kindly, which is what she is encouraged, and with a lot of love in your heart, then you have to have a lot of love in your heart. And you have to be very kind. And you have to be very polite. And I didn't know that as I was training as a teacher, I was transforming myself to be that person. And so that was life-changing for me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, because all the love that you had, that's the thing that I think, and I don't think it's gender-based. I just think that desire to love is natural to everyone. And so if you create the environment for it, it just comes back.
Right.
And I'm not going to say the kids police themselves, but they want the harmony. And that's what I remember for it. So then when I was back in rote classrooms, it was like, I really didn't like it. And I said, I wish I'd stayed till I was 6th grade. There was other requirements. Right. So 36 years doing that. And then.
Yes. And don't forget, sorry.
Oh, tell me.
Love for work. They love work. And, I used to hate work. I used to think work was horrible. But they actually love work. And can I make just a little story?
Sure. No. You're a storyteller.
My first year, I had this wild boy. I call him Miguel. He was a very spoiled boy. And he was a riot. And I would be crying at the end of every day, writing on my logbook because he'd be pushing materials off the desk. And if we sit in a circle, he'd push all the kids off their chairs. Oh, it was just wild. My supervisor came to me and said, Susie, you have to have faith in the child. And faith in this child? Like I was like going insane. What faith in this child? So she said, all you have to do is teach him how to work. Work? He doesn't even want to work. So after class, we would spend 15 to half an hour sitting and working on just cards. So I'll say, point to the airplane, point to the Jeep. Like this kid was wild. But believe me, after about a week or so of just being calm and say, okay, I'll try again. Where's the Jeep? And where's the or where's the ta? He would transform. He transforms through work. And then he became my little police boy in the classroom. He would be the one to say, oh, no, you're not supposed to work that way. You work this way, And then he'd sit down like me and he would demonstrate how to work. It was a miracle.
It is.
And of all the miracles in a classroom, it was fascinating. So children love work. I truly believe it's really in all of us to love our work and to love doing what we do is a very, very important thing in our life.
Right.
And that comes to writing. When I started writing, I love writing. It makes my heart leap.
Yes.
It's just as fulfilling as teaching for me.
Yes, I feel the same way. It was always hard for me. Writing essays is the hardest thing I do. I just write the thoughts and I have to figure, okay, because I'm really good at sewing and putting together clothes, but that's what I have to do with my sentences. I have to figure out, okay, what's the arm? What's the leg? What's the sleeve? What's the zipper? I don't just write linearly. And that's one of the things I noticed in one of our classes you and I were in is that the beauty of the words are just as important as the words themselves, because you're putting together a workbook for, was it parents or is it for teachers who are doing Montessori? You were developing pages.
Yes, it's for parents. Yes.
Yes. And it was just lovely. And then you're really thinking about each, when you turn the page, what are they going to learn on this page? It's not just throwing it together. It's not like instant rice or instant noodle or whatever, pot noodle. You really, really care. And it shows in all of your work. And then you have this irreverent sense of humor that nobody knows until you pop out with these absolutely delightful poems. I didn't ask you to prepare for a poem, but we might share that poem if you actually put it up somewhere so we can read it, because you are so funny. And it's just a pleasure to listen to you. I wanted to ask you about being a single parent, because at a certain point, you had kids and the marriage went its way and you went your way. What was that like for you? Because you need a lot of energy to teach children and you need a lot of energy to raise children alone. How did you manage that?
Yes, that was very difficult. That was absolutely difficult. It's one of the most difficult parts of my life. My children, I was very lucky, were studying in the same Montessori school I was teaching. So they were with me most of the time. But my children also loved extracurricular activities. They loved singing and dancing and all that. So after school, we had a life of going to singing lessons and dancing lessons and doing all those things. I had my mother with me for 6 months of the year.
Oh, I didn't know
she would come.
Okay.
Yes. She would come and she would help me. She was not very young then, so she didn't do any heavy work, but she did help with the cooking sometimes. And when she wasn't there, I would end up cooking at midnight after I put the kids to sleep, so that the next day after dance class, let's say, we would have dinner as soon as we came home. So it was a busy, busy life for us. And what kept me is faith. I just said a lot of prayers and kept my strength. And I just didn't think. I just did what I had to do. My children were everything to me. I always wanted to have children. And that's why I was a teacher. I love children. So I dedicated my entire life for them. Yes, it was very difficult, but I made it. And they stayed close to me.
And they still are. So they were probably 3 or 4 when they were in Montessori. Because Montessori goes to what grade?
Yes. They were conceived while I was teaching Montessori. They were Montessori children all through and through. Even as infants, I'd be carrying them with me in the classroom. And all that. They'd be helping me with bulletin boards when they started to grow up, and they'd be helping me peer tutor some of my students who had difficulty reading.
Because they were working,
And
and you knew that
they were
children's
working
like
when
to
I was
work.
working after class. Yes, they love doing that.
Fascinating. I only know that the model of going to third grade, and that's how it was in the U.S., where it was in the public school. And my son went to 1 year of. So does it stop at third grade, or does it stop at another grade?
No, our school ended at grade 8, but we do have other Montessori schools that have high school. It's very different. It's not like the high schools you'll see, but it's a lot of hands-on learning because teenagers, they want to feel empowered. If they want to earn money, they act like businessmen. They plant the vegetables. They learn how to market the vegetables. They do the math. They do the accounting. They do lots of hands-on with that. And the same with science. If they want to work on science, botany comes in place, right? They see what kind of fertilizers, what chemicals, what no chemicals, or whatever. So it's a very hands-on thing for Montessori when you get into high school.
So that actually it really prepares them for what is usually a disaster for most college students is, what is my focus? They've already got it down from
They've
having
got it
been in
down.
Montessori. They know what their skills are and what their strengths are, and they've already pursued it. Thank you for telling me that, because I didn't know. I believed in it. There just wasn't the opportunity. So now I wanted to get into when you retired, which sounds like it was the pandemic. You wanted to write, but you didn't want to write in a vacuum. Did you get that idea for your memoir? Because I'm not sure if you wanted it to be a memoir or an actual fiction novel, but you started to write, and I've listened to you, and you're talking about motorcycle rides and Filipino food, and your wildness was like, man, she was something else. How did you decide? Because you'd always wanted to do it, and you finally had that chance.
Yes, well, during the pandemic, I retired, and I've always wanted to be a writer. I had already written a novel for children, which was unpublished, but I was working already with an editor then. And I stumbled upon Ninja Writer, and they gave me the tools to write. Now, I've chosen to write a novel, which was fiction based on a true story. So it's based on my story as a teenager when I was wild and crazy before I became a Montessori teacher. And that was during martial law, which was really very frightening. And part of that novel, I put in my best friend who was tortured and raped during martial law because she was against the regime and she had organized what they call a New People's Army. I had a boyfriend who was jailed. And so my innocence, my wild and carefree life and my innocence was taken away during that because when he was arrested, I thought he would be tortured and killed like my friend. My friend wasn't killed, but she was tortured. So that is the sort of the middle point of my story. And I thought it was a good story to tell.
That comes to the next thing, because when you write novels, sometimes they just come in an easy stroke. But as you learn the structure of a novel, you kind of start realizing, oh, there's a lot of autobiography. And you had mentioned Natalie Goldberg to me. Tell me about how that came full circle about your life and your story and the book.
Oh, yes. You know, Natalie Goldberg believes in writing and just writing. Writing and writing and writing nonstop. Let the pen lead you. Just stay pen on paper. And what happens is while you do this every day, you might start out with saying, oh, I'm so lousy. What you call monkey mind. You have the editor telling you, oh, I'm lousy writer. I'm horrible. And you start writing that. And then later, monkey mind steps aside. And then you start discovering your mind, what she calls discovering your mind. And then all the things come out. And one of the things she says is write, I remember. And so I write, I remember. And I start remembering all the things, let's say, during martial law, what had happened to me during martial law. And I write and write and write all those down. And out of that mess that you write in your notebook, out comes something very valuable. A gem you'd find in there. And next thing you know, you're writing poetry or you're writing a story or you're really getting deep into the heart of your story or into the message or the theme you'd like to portray. And then you can transfer that into your book.
Exactly. So you and I write very similarly. Some of it's my morning pages, but I write and then I write all the way to what was the emotion and what did I learn? and then I put it in there. And you had said just before we started recording, and I want the listeners to know this is such a deep woman. These big ideas pop right out of her head. In my novel, I had to grapple and go back to my roots. I thought my life was ordinary. And then you said, what as the follow up? Do you remember?
That everybody's life matters. The ordinary matters. And that everyone should write about their pain and about their life. Natalie Goldberg says, write what's in front of you. And you put in all the details, right? And when I go back to my roots, my details I thought was so ordinary. And when I talk to you or read it to you or to our classmates, they're like, really? For them, it's very, very new. But when I listened to one of our classmates from Mississippi, I was so fascinated. I've never been there. And all what he's talking about is farming or the gnats that they see in the field and how he works his day to avoid the gnats.
And that would be David Davis, right? Would that be David?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the same thing with my life. I think it's so ordinary. I thought it was no big deal to talk about martial law and the life in the Philippines and all that. And now I'm discovering my roots. Now I'm going back and I'm remembering my childhood, my teenage life, and I'm discovering that my life, no matter how ordinary it seems to me, may not be ordinary to other people. And that even if it's ordinary, it really can be extraordinary. So I believe that the ordinary is really extraordinary. It's really finding it in you or finding it in your day-to-day life. That everything is special, really. The tiniest things in our life is very special. And I believe in that. I believe in the simplicity of our life that we think is very simple is actually very essential and very significant and very beautiful. And it's something to be shared.
It is something to be
So
shared.
I put that in my writing. Yes.
And I know you do. And this is what clings to me that I didn't quite realize, that you and I both had political parents. Yeah.
Interesting.
So does Audrey Stinson, who I've also interviewed. I try to avoid talking about politics because the public life and the persona you have to create, but its effect on the children of a political parent is, I think people don't understand that. Other topic we were going to cover, but I just didn't know where to segue it, is that living in Canada is very different, and British Columbia is very different than living in America. And in America, we are very polarized, and it's all about, I don't know if it's about politics, but it's about ideas about how we share the load is what I would call it. I don't know if for all of the anger and angst about gender, I don't think that's the issue, but it's how people work and what is valued in work is, I think, at the center of the arguments in America. But in Canada, it sounds like people live in a very different way with each other. Is it harmony? I don't know, but it seems very different. Is there anything you wanted to share about your experiences growing there and becoming a Canadian or a British Columbian citizen? I don't even know that. I'm very ignorant.
Yes, I've noticed a very big difference when my children studied in LA and then we went down to LA. I'll start from the beginning. In Canada, there is a great diversity of cultures, and all these cultures are respected and at the same time merged together into a tapestry of one Canadian culture. So the Canadian is not just British, not just East Indian, it's not just Filipino, it's not just Mexican. It's all of us together working together. That is the Canadian culture. I believe the American culture is just as diverse, but it is approached in a different way. That it had started as aside from the indigenous people or the Native Americans that you speak of, aside from the Native Americans, you've started as a European culture, white culture, I guess, and that all the diverse cultures around it have to adapt into that main original culture from the pilgrim that have started from Europe. That is the approach of the Americans. And so there is a struggle right now that I see in America, that the main white culture from Europe, I guess, believe that's the main culture of America, and that there's this struggle that is going on. And I've noticed that a lot. I went to LA and I saw Mexicans. In Canada, Mexicans are with us and they are Canadians. I can only speak for LA because I've only been there. They're very distinct Mexicans in their own community and have immersion into the American culture on both sides have not yet gelled together, I guess.
I think you're absolutely correct. And I just don't know what we'll do, but I wanted to just put that little idea in because that was very valuable to hear about that. Because when I watch Canadian shows, there's a completely different approach to even how they write screenplays and how the characters are. It's a smorgasbord where in America, certain characters are always these people. They're always these people. And the good guys are this. And then they change it, but they act just like white people, but they are of different colored skin. And it's exhausting. I just wanted to just touch on it a little bit without making everybody go head for the hills, because you have been writing so many things and you've got lots of things just on the edge of completion. Do you have a book title that you want to share? And I know that you write a little bit on Medium, but when you get ready, you're going to explode and you'll be in everywhere. How should people reach you? I would love to know, what is the title of your fiction book? Do you know what it is yet?
Can I just grab 1 second?
Okay, this is the reveal.
This is my poetry book called Falling in Love with Me. And it does bring the basic notion. This is for teenagers, but I initially really wrote this for my 2 daughters who are in their 30s. And I weeded off the younger poets to the more mature ones for mothers or older women. And this one tells you that you're good enough, you're enough, that you've got this. And every time my children would write me their anxieties, I would write them a poem. And they say, Mom, I can't make it for the interview. What am I going to do? Or I'm having a hard time at my job. And I would write them a poem. And this is what came out.
And then read the title
my name
for us.
Gabriela. Yeah, Gabriela Francisco.
And it's Falling in Love with Me. That's
Falling in Love with Me.
Right.
And a self-love poetry. And it is just to teach you. And I just feel the young people nowadays, that generation, they have so many challenges in life that I've never had as a child. No matter how terrible the unrest, the political situation in the Philippines, they don't have the security we've had growing up. And it's probably because of the unit of the family. It's very different. It's changing nowadays. So yes, it is just a book of hope. And again, the ordinary, the magic is really in you. And that's very Montessori, isn't it? The magic is in you. Magic is in every child, in every person, in every teacher, every adult. And that's what I want to tell the world. It's really in all of us. And that no matter how ordinary we feel, we are really extraordinary. Another one is Chasing Sunset in Manila. It's going to be my novel. So watch out for that.
I was going to say, any words of wisdom to say? And you said it by flowing about that you wrote poems to your daughters to give them courage. And you are ready to be a Montessori teacher or mom to others.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I do have a few books called the Montessori Parenting Book. I finished my book called Montessori Philosophy, and I'm on my way to finish Montessori at Home, so you can bring the Montessori philosophy at home. And then Montessori Curriculum for Parents, just to know what we're teaching children so that you can have a clue on how to teach your own children at home.
It was just a pleasure having you here, Susie. You are such a deep friend. And we will hear from you again. This will come out, I'll call it July 2023. However, because of podcasts, it'll be there forever, as long as there's electricity.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. You do such a great job, Margie.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful, a wonderful friend. And I thank you, and all the best to you.
And all the best to you and our listeners out there in the, whatever it is, the verse. Bye-bye.
Yes, you're very special. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Stomp with Debbie Walker, a podcast to encourage, inspire, and empower the woman in the middle. Listen to us on wherever you live in the digital world. And remember, send us a note, like us, and smile. Bye.